My name is Janet Thurgood. I had a near-death experience in 2009 as a result of adrenal failure from living with 25 years worth of autoimmune illness. You know, when you live with autoimmune illness, you have good times and you have bad times. I would come and go in and out of the good and the bad times, but oftentimes when I would get at my sickest, at my lowest, I would lay in bed and say to my husband, I feel like there are forces from beyond the veil trying to suck me out of my body. I mean, that's literally what it felt like when I was at my sickest. I was experiencing anxiety and depression and obviously chronic fatigue and pain. And it was really difficult to wend my way through life. I ended up having 6 children. I ran a full-time cleaning company out of my home. I was busy with involvement in my church. And as a result of that, I think that it really taxed my physical body, my adrenal glands. They can only handle so much of that kind of stress. So in one of my opportunities to start to get my health back and start to get better, I sold my cleaning company. I put the kids back in school and started just focusing on self-care. And a part of that self-care was exercising. And I didn't realize at the time that an exercise regimen was not what my body was ready for. And I ended up having adrenal failure. I was exercising with a group of women from my church, and almost, 10, 15 minutes into this workout, I started not feeling very good. In fact, before even getting there, I was not feeling well anyways, but I thought, you know what? No pain, no gain. I'm going to push my way through this. And that was not a good option for me, because my body actually did go down. I started feeling dizzy and weak and shaky, and I collapsed. And as I collapsed, I was laying there in the park as the rest of the women were finishing their workouts. And the last thought that went through my mind was, I'm going to die here. And I knew that I was leaving my body. I could feel myself being pulled, literally pulled out of my body. I could feel my extremities getting hard. My arms started to curl in towards the body. My legs went stiff. I couldn't move my body. I started to notice that I lost my vision. And then the last thing that started to go was my ability to breathe. And that was terrifying for a small moment. So I panicked a little bit as I was laying there. I knew that I had no control over the situation. I knew I had to surrender to the situation, and so I did. And as I popped out of the body, I sort of moved in a direction that was away from the whole scene. I saw that women were coming to gather around to see what was going on. I was lifeless. They said that my lips turned blue. They couldn't get a pulse. They were trying to resuscitate me. Several of them called 911. Some of the women were crying. As I was in that space of going from panic, the panic flipped almost immediately into peace. And as I moved farther away from the body, I noticed that the feeling was just this feeling of overwhelming love and peace. And it was effortless and smooth and easy. And I wanted to go more towards that feeling. And I continued. It was like my free will was steering or navigating, if that makes any sense. I knew that I was going somewhere. I didn't know where, because at that point, I still didn't have any vision. I couldn't see anything, but I knew that etherically I was moving in a direction and that my free will was navigating. And so as I continued to navigate in the direction of peace, I began to get perspective. I began to see from above the situation. As I looked back at the women who were freaking out and panicking, and some were crying, some of them were on their phones calling 911. And I could hear the sirens. I could hear the ambulance coming to save the day. But it was interesting for me to notice that as I was witnessing the situation from like an external outside perspective, almost like I was hovering above the situation as I was witnessing that, I remember thinking, I don't understand why they're acting that way. Everybody was so stressed out and they were freaking out. Some people were crying. They were panicking. One woman was slapping my face, trying to get me to revive, trying to get me to breathe again. And she was saying, come on, Janet, you got to breathe. And they were calling to me, come back, come back. And I remember thinking, like, I was in such a peaceful place. I was not having the same kind of experience that they were having. And I remember thinking that it felt strange to me that they were so freaked out. And yet I was in this place of absolute love and peace. And I felt compassion for their situation. I did not leave the body for very long. I was only out for a short time. I didn't go to heaven and I didn't speak to angels in that moment. But I know that I hovered in between, in that threshold between this physical mortal dimension and the other side of the veil. And as I hovered there in that space, I was given an opportunity to choose, but it was recommended that I stay with my body, that I go back into that body. I remember as I looked back at the scene and watched what these women were doing and watched how it was playing out and tried to gain understanding for what was actually happening, there were three things that hit me the most. And the first was, as I look back onto the body, I remember thinking that the body it just looked like an inanimate bag of dirt and water. So it was lifeless. It was not animate. It wasn't doing anything. It didn't have any power. And as I looked at that, it was a strange feeling to think how familiar that body looked in the moment, but yet at the same time separated from it. The perspective that I got in that moment was, I used to think that I was that body when I would stand and look in the mirror or get ready for the day or come and go and greet people and have experiences in my life. I thought I was that body. I thought that that body was my persona. And so in that moment when I thought, you know what, that body's lifeless. That's not me. I'm over here and that body's over there doing nothing. And so I began to question, I began to ask questions, and I began to think to myself, if I'm not that body, who am I? What is this? Why am I still conscious? Why am I not panicking to breathe? Why am I not freaking out? Why I am in this state of absolute peace and bliss and love? That led me to the next understanding that was given in that moment. And that understanding was, death is not real. Death is a doorway that we pass through. It's a corridor. And our souls are eternal. There are aspects of you, there are aspects of me that are conscious, eternal identities. And that was a pivotal moment for me that I still to this day have not forgotten, that learning that there is a part of you that is the same yesterday, today, and forever, that is always conscious, that is always going to be there, that will never die, that will never run out of time, that will never have anything taken from it, because that part of you is everything. That part of you is all of the love that you think you're seeking in this world. You are all of that. And so in that moment of having perspective downloaded into my consciousness, into my soul, I recognized that there is nothing that can threaten an immortal, eternal being, nothing. And so that ended my bout with depression and anxiety in that moment. The third thing that I think that I recognized and realized in that moment, that short, brief time of popping out of the body, was I always tell people this, that I feel like I stepped into the oneness. So as I asked the question, who am I? If I'm not that body, who am I? I stepped into this feeling of, I am every blade of grass. I am every sand in the sea. I am every mountaintop. I am every star in the heavens. I am the container of the universe. And in that knowing, I started recognizing that I can see myself being reflected in all of creation. And that oneness is something that every single one of us as human beings have access to. And I didn't know that I had access to that until I popped away from the body. So I'm grateful for that. This experience was a catalyst for me, for expanding my consciousness, for stepping into the oneness, for realizing that I'm one with you. I'm one with God. I'm one with all creation. So for me, the takeaway has been, it's not really about death. It's not really about dying. It's about opening and expanding. God is inviting and encouraging all of us to come to know ourselves better. And I think that's the purpose for NDEs. I will never fear the process of death again. It was so easy. It was so smooth. It was so gentle. It was so kind and compassionate and peaceful and not scary at all. I used to fear the process of death, and now I never will again. And when you recognize that you are one with everything in your experience, you start treating the world in a very different way. You start valuing things in a very different way. And so those are my takeaways. That was the learning that I got from it. And that was actually where my 25-year battle with Lyme's disease and autoimmune illness ended, was in the recognition of who am I as a divine, eternal being.